I want to give a big thank you to all my patrons, and I'll be doing a Kingsguard roll call after today's video.
If you do a quick Google search on series you should read when getting into adult fantasy, The Name of the Wind and the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss is always near the top of that list. A lot of people say that's for good reason. A lot of other people say it's not. Has to be one of the most polarizing books I've seen in the fantasy community. And when I look at all the other major series, I've really crossed a lot of them off the list, or at least attempted them. Name of the Wind is one that I have kind of put in my back pocket, waiting for a rainy day, waiting for a reading slump, because I've always had this feeling that I was going to love The Name of the Wind. I don't know why. I've avoided so many spoilers about this book in this series. I knew very little going in, except that Kvothe played a lute, and his name was Kvothe, and it was spelled weird, and that's all I really knew. I knew it was a chronicling tale. I had an idea that it was a framed narrative, but other than that, I really went into this blind, but I just had that feeling. You ever get that feeling? I do. I had it with First Law, and I had it with The Name of the Wind. It absolutely applied to First Law, and with The Name of the Wind, I have to say, I think that this is a wonderful book. And I know that some people will now watch this and saying, you're totally wrong. Some people are cheering me on. I will say this. There are some things in this book that don't necessarily work for my personal taste. Just some plot devices that, to be honest with you, just aren't my favorites. It's not that I have a bias against them, but they're not my favorite settings in a book. But I think that the world building on a low level is just outstanding. I have not read a ton of Ursula Le Guin, but from the pieces that I have read from Wizard of Earthsea, it gives me Le Guin vibes in a lot of ways, and I think that's a really good thing. And if you read Steering the Craft, which is Le Guin's book on, writing fantasy, I think a lot of that book pertains to Patrick Rothfuss' writing. I would be curious to see if he's read it or if it was an influence on him. I have to imagine it was, because I see a lot of what she taught in that book coming out through his writing, and like the best examples of that. So I'm going to go over what I did love about this book. And then I will briefly at the end mention some things that did not work for me. But largely, I did enjoy my experience here. And since I closed the book, I had a feeling like, hey, that was really good. That was even great. But do I want to go ahead and pick up The Wise Man's Fear? Do I want to wait? We all know book 3 is in limbo. But the more I have been away from it, right, a few days since finishing, I have just continually thought about the book and all the mysteries that it holds. And I think that this is going to improve over time, and I think it's a book that is actually going to get a lot better with rereads in the future as well. And the main thing that I keep thinking about, and I know I try not to spoil myself, but I cannot believe how cozy of a read this was. I'm disappointed that I'm reading it at the beginning of summer. I should have waited, and someone should have told me to read it in the fall. Oh my goodness. Leaves falling, the Waystone, and all of it. Just a perfect backdrop to a fall read. And I'm a really big fan of seasonal type reads. For whatever reason, Lord of the Rings has always been my Christmas read. I could see this being a yearly reread in the fall. That's how just amazingly cozy it is. There's almost like this sublime, dark, yet not like gothic feel that I just really ate up in the setting of this book. And in this eerie, slightly like dusky feeling setting in the Waystone Inn, you have Kvothe, right? And Kvothe is such a stark contrast to the feel that I got from the setting of this book and all the people else in the story, the simple people coming into the tavern, and then throughout the story, the people that we see. Kvothe is red hair. He's almost standing out in the backdrop of this cozy, wonderful little world. And I think that is very much on purpose. I think that that cozy feeling goes against his braggadocious ways, that he is so pompous and has red hair and is not afraid to talk well about himself. He in every way stands out in the narrative. I wouldn't say that he's like one of my favorite characters of all time, but I think he is a really strongly crafted character with distinct characteristics, and there is also more than meets the eye with him, at least in my opinion. I hear a lot of people level the accusation that he is a Mary Sue, or I don't know the inverse of that for a male. I'm forgetting right now. Mary Stu, I think, is what it is. I'm not so much interested in that conversation as, do people consider Kvothe to be a chosen one trope? I think it kind of seems that way, at least from book 1. And I have to say that if that is the case, I really enjoy the fact that this is a different take on the chosen one trope that's not just pessimistic. I've seen that a lot, right? I think we've all seen that over the years. I think of Kellis from Prince of Nothing, or even Paul from Dune, being a pessimistic take on the chosen one trope. You could probably even throw Rand al'Thor in there possibly. But with this character, with Kvothe. It feels like it's a chosen one that knows he's the chosen one, and he feels like he has earned it and that he deserves it. So he comes across very braggadocious, like I said before. And that is a different take, right, on the chosen one trope without being overly pessimistic as well, because it seems like he has done some good. And I did mention that this is a frame narrative, which I happen to be a really big fan of. If I had to pick one thing about The Name of the Wind that really stood out to me that made this such a positive experience is the fact that we have stories within stories within stories, and it makes me get more engaged, because sometimes whenever I'm being told something, I have to take a second and think, well, who's telling me this story? And what frame is this story being given in? And can I trust the source of that information? And when that happens, I get into a trance. I just get really focused, right? And trying to pick these pieces apart and see if someone is trying to lie to me, possibly, right? Or bending the truth. And that had like a trance throughout the whole book when I read it, just like this like sublime feeling. And I think that this had a big role to play in that. Patrick Rothfuss' writing has always been praised. A lot of people really, really enjoy his prose. I have seen some people say it's not for them. Prose can be rather subjective. I happen to think that he is obviously a very strong writer, at least in my opinion. But where he excels in this game of fantasy books, for me, is the fact that he has crafted a world that feels so well realized. And I say that a lot about some of the fantasy that I love, but he takes it to a whole different level. This world feels lived in, but it also has all the details of our world. Like when you think of creating a secondary world, you know, there should be literature, there should be religion, there should be currency, there should be accents, all of these things, characters. This has all of that in the world, and I loved it. I think the details that he went into are, I would say meticulous at some points, but really, really needed whenever you want something to feel super immersive, and he does a great job of that. And not only is the world filled with all of that, and some really interesting characters and locations, but at the heart of it, it's filled with mystery, and so is the narrative, and so is Kvothe. And that is what I felt with The Name of the Wind, trying to crack a whole bunch of mysteries and taking the little pieces of information that we're getting from a story within a story within a story or whatever it is and piece that together. I really enjoy that intrigue with this book. And I think that's probably what keeps people coming back time and time again, and probably why a lot of people really, really want book 3. The Name of the Wind is only book 1, and I can see myself wanting to reread this, look over the details, and try to piece some things together. I think Bast is one of the best pieces of the mystery. Even from the get-go, when a certain thing happens, I'm trying to keep this spoiler-free, but Bast is supposed to be underneath Kvothe, and it's almost like Kvothe is defending his actions and saying, no, I did the right thing there, don't worry about it. And immediately I'm like, well, Bast is supposed to be underneath Kvothe, right? So why is he justifying himself to apparently, his lesser? That's a really interesting piece, and I immediately was like, either that's an inconsistency, which I doubted, or Bast is another part of this mystery. It happens to be that I think he is, especially by the end of the book. So it's just little things like that that will keep me coming back for more. And I think that Rothfuss ties all that into his world to make such a low-level, interpersonal, just amazing piece of world building. And this is a place that I would like to visit potentially. Maybe not at the times that we're in right now in the story, but a time before. When I closed the last pages of The Name of the Wind, I came away thinking that community matters quite a bit in this world, and maybe is a central theme of what Patrick Rothfuss was trying to get across. I could be totally wrong here, and I'm curious to see if anyone else has ever mentioned this in a review or an analysis or anything, but Kvothe is such a sore thumb on the tapestry of this world, like I mentioned earlier, but still finds a way to finally fit in, even whenever he feels like he does not want to. And we see him in some pretty tough spots in this book, where he is alone, and there's no one around him, there's no one there for him, but he always seems to find a place in the world. And when the story opens up, and this isn't a spoiler, it's in the first few pages, but when the story opens up, Kvothe is upset that the Waystone Inn is empty. He, that is what is bothering him at that very moment, right? There is silence within the Waystone Inn. And it seems like the world has gone dark, and bad things are coming, bad things are happening. And it's interesting that the imagery I think that is chosen to show this is the fact that we can tell that by the taverns and the inns all across the country being empty. So there is a lack of communing, of coming together. And Kvothe hates that. And the only thing that he is really thinking about being an innkeeper is how he wants people to come together. And I think that through his story, where you see him fall out with people, go to different places, belong to different groups, all this stuff, it always seems like his best moments are whenever he's coming together. Even whenever he's in a feud with people, whenever he finds his rightful place, there's always someone that extends him a helping hand. And he is surrounded by really good people and good friends. And I think that that is what has helped make the legend of Kvothe, is the people behind him. And the inn being empty and signaling bad times, to me, is great imagery that this is a very important piece of this world, coming together and having community. And there are some friendships in this book that I see Kvothe having that are, I want those relationships. And I think I have had those relationships and still do to this day. But it reminds me of some of my best friends. And it's just the way that he gets along with them and the way that he loves little things about them, whether they're too serious or you can't trust them. There's little things, little quirks to these side characters, but more about the relationships. So I think community and friendship is at the core of the story. And I would love to know if you feel that way. Please let me know in the comments below. But I just felt like the inn being empty is a very big indicator that the world's in a bad place. And those are all the praises that I have, and just kind of my thoughts about The Name of the Wind and what I got out of it and what I loved about it. A+ world building. I really just think it's one of the better settings in fantasy ever, and I also think that the world building has such amazing detail that makes it feel very lived in and realized. And I thought some of the author notes in the end of the 10th year anniversary edition were really, really awesome to see. I love hearing a writer's perspective on their own work. As far as things that didn't work for me and like why this isn't like a top 3 book of all time for me or anything, I am not the biggest fan of like the rogue thief kid in a city. Tarbean felt like it went on just a little too long with me, even though there were things in it that I really did love. Like the feud that Kvothe has within that city. Thought that was cool. The storytelling, obviously massive for the story. So I'm not saying that it was meandering or worthless or anything like that. It's just that piece of a story. I've seen it done in other stories and I've liked it more. But here it didn't do much for me. And also the university won me over by the end, but at first I was like, the school setting can be a hit or miss. Again, these aren't things that I am always against, but there are things that I don't look for in a book per se. It's not something that I'm always like chomping at the bit to get to. But I do think that he executed both very well, and the university by the end definitely won me over. I didn't realize how big of a piece that would play in the story, to be honest with you, again, because I went in blind. But where it ended, I'm like all in. And the mysteries at the university are so cool. So I would say even really just the rogue thief thing, it was okay. It was okay for me. I think there was a lot of good world building in there and moving the plot along with all the mysteries and stuff. But it's probably my least favorite part of the story. That was, once we got out of that, I felt a lot more comfortable with it. And I liked the pace that he kept after that. So not much that I didn't like, to be honest with you, and I think that I'm going to enjoy it even more on a reread. So now that I finally talked about The Name of the Wind, I can be told whether I'm right or wrong down in the comments below, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. There's a lot of people I love that I see in my comments a lot of times say do not like this book. Then there's a lot of others that I see that this is their favorite book. So I'm somewhere in between. I'm definitely on the more, I would say, very positive side than I am at neutral or disliking the book. I mean, I thought it was really great. And it certainly has a shot to making my top 10 for the year, I think, though the competition's pretty stacked. If you like this video, you can hit like. If you dislike it, hit dislike. If you loved it, think about subscribing. I'll be doing a lot more book reviews, and I'll definitely be talking about The Wise Man's Fear. And who knows, maybe I'll have some sort of spoiler discussion after I read both books. I think that could also be a lot of fun. There's a Patreon in the description. It's optional, but always appreciated. Until I see you next time, be good, be safe. Remember to always keep turning the page.
Big shout out to all my patrons, my Wildlings Knights watching Kingsguard. My Kingsguard include Henrik, Brendan, Nick, Oscar, Stuart, Josephine, Ikaika, Amanda, RJ, Shad, Nicoletta, Tanner, Jennifer, Garrick, Frank, Jay, Sarah, Pat, Kevin, Ryan, Michael, Terrence, Wade, Darren, FM, Derry, Boss, Mitch, Sebastian, Benjamin, and Joe Bot. Thank you all so much. You're the best.